Hello, this is Candy with eyes2jesus.blogspot.com and Candy_the_preacher on Instagram. My name is Candy. Welcome to our study where we have been going through the whole book of Acts in the Bible. Today we're up to Acts chapter 25. If you want to see any previous videos in this study, I have an Acts playlist on my YouTube at eyes2jesus. Or you can just jump in right here and start where you are. If you want to follow along in the Bible, feel free to follow along in whatever Bible translation you would like. Or if you want to use the same Bible version I am using the NRSVUE. That is the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. So if you're following along, turn to Acts chapter 25. And there's not a whole lot going on in this chapter, so this isn't going to be one of my typical long videos. But to recall context, because I know it's been a few weeks, I mean, we had Thanksgiving, which is the biggest holiday in my family, because we don't do Christmas. You can check out my previous videos all over this channel to see why, including my anti-vlogmas. I did that for a couple of years. But anyways, let's back up to verse 27 of chapter 24 to get context, and then we'll read from there. So starting verse 27 from chapter 24 in the book of Acts, it says, "After 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and since he wanted to grant the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison." Chapter 25, verse 1. 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up from Caesarea area to Jerusalem. So now Festus is a new ruler replacing Felix. And Festus needs to find out what all the deals are. You know, the handover now to his rulership. He needs to know what's all going on. Okay, so he goes up to Jerusalem. And we see here in verse 2, where the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. They appealed to him, all right? So this is a report against Paul. They're saying the problems they have with Paul, right? Verse 3, "And requested as a favor to them against Paul to have him, Paul, transferred to Jerusalem. They were, in fact, planning to ambush to kill him along the way." So they're saying, you know, why don't you do us a favor? Just send Paul back to us. We'll take care of it. You don't need to worry about it. And then they're thinking this will be great because then we'll have an ambush set up so that Paul will be killed on his way here. Problem solved. So this is by the chief priest. These are supposed to be highly moral and religious Jewish people. Yet, they're so blinded by their rage over Paul because Paul won't shut up. Paul keeps talking about how Jesus, whom they had killed, rose from the dead, right? Paul keeps spreading the good news of the gospel. Good news, Jesus paid for your sins. Good news, he rose from the dead. Good news, so will you. Do you receive that free gift of the good news? That's up to you. So Paul's going around spreading this good news. They want to shut him up. And they don't want to shut him up just by imprisoning him because as a Roman citizen, he's still able to write letters and to have people come visit him where he preaches, right? And where he teaches others what to preach while they go out and preach. So Paul has not been shut up by being in prison. So they think the only way to shut Paul up is for them to basically have him murdered. So they're ignoring the Old Testament covenant and the Torah that they espouse to be under and to love the Word of God. They're going against that, and they want to commit ambush and murder. So where does their priority really lie? If their priority really lied with following Yahweh God, then they wouldn't be trying to murder anyone. Now, would they? Looks more like their priority falls in pride and power and their status. Okay, verse 4, though, check out Festus's reply. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So Festus wants to hear from Paul. And then verse 5 he says, "So," he said, "let those of you who have the authority come down with me. And if there's anything wrong about the man, let them accuse him." That's the legal process, especially with Paul being a legal Roman citizen. He had rights. So Festus is beginning his rulership on the up and up. He is keeping with the law here. Okay, so verse 6. After he had stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. The next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. Verse 7. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Paul has been in prison for years now. The Jews keep trying to get the death penalty on him. You'd think after all this time, if Paul actually did anything wrong, they would have collected the evidence by now, right? No evidence, right? Because he didn't do anything wrong. Verse 8, Paul said in his defense, "I have in no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews, or against the temple, or against the emperor." So Paul's saying, I haven't broken any laws. And then clearly, there's no evidence provided that he has either. Okay, so verse 9. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, asked Paul, "Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried there before me on these charges?" So Festus is like, well, I could have a win-win here. If Paul agrees to go up to Jerusalem and I go up there and try him there, then the Jewish chief priests will get what they want, which is they wanted Paul transferred to Jerusalem, right? Okay, but verse 10, Paul said, "I am standing before the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know." Yeah, because no evidence has been provided. So, basically at this point, Festus is standing there scratching his head. He's like, why is this man even in prison? Okay, verse 11. Now, if I am in the wrong, Paul's still speaking, he says, "Now if I am in the wrong and have committed something for which I deserve to die, I am not trying to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. I appeal to the emperor." See, emphasizing that the Jews are seeking the death penalty for Paul. Yet they can't even get their story straight on exactly what crime he supposedly committed was. And there is zero evidence based on hearsay, rumors, and lies. So, but Paul is saying, but if there's nothing to the charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. Paul is appealing to the law. Especially as a Roman citizen, his rights have to be recognized, that no one can legally turn Paul over to the Jews without any evidence that Paul did anything against the Jews. All right, so verse 12. Then Festus, after he had conferred with his council, replied, "You have appealed to the emperor? To the emperor you will go." Verse 13. After several days had passed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to welcome Festus. And Bernice is more accurately Berenike. And this is Agrippa II. And Agrippa II here and Berenike, they were brother and sister. And Agrippa II, he was a ruler. He ruled over several of the cities in Galilee and some of the cities of Perea. And why are they visiting Festus here? Because that was custom. It was custom that rulers in surrounding areas, when there was a new ruler in another area, they would go visit them or welcome them, right? Okay, verse 14. Since they were staying there several days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, before Agrippa, saying, "There was a man here who was left in prison by Felix." So he's like, there's a man here. He was imprisoned during Felix's rule and left in prison when Felix left and I took over. All right, verse 15. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me about him and asked for a sentence against him. I told them that it was not the custom of the Romans to hand over anyone before the accused had met the accusers face to face and been given an opportunity to make a defense against the charge. And he's talking about how he upheld that law, which he did, as we saw in verse 5. Okay, continuing in verse 17. So when they met here, I lost no time, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they did not charge him with any of the crimes that I was expecting. Instead, they had certain points of disagreement with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. None of that's a crime against anyone anywhere at this time, and hopefully not even now, right? None of that's a crime. Okay, so verse 20. Since I was at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wished to go to Jerusalem and be tried there on these charges. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of his imperial majesty, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to the emperor. Verse 22. Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him. So Agrippa, he's kind of intrigued, all right? So verse 23, on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice, or Berenike, came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Then Festus gave the order, and Paul was brought in. So when Agrippa and Berenike were coming in, they were expecting to be entertained. This was a big to-do was made of this. They were fascinated by the story. They wanted to know more. So verse 24, and Festus said, King Agrippa, and all here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish community petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. The Jews keep calling for the death penalty, yet they can't even get their story straight on what crime he committed that was deserving of death, and they have no evidence. Okay, so verse 25, but I found that he had done nothing deserving death. And when he appealed to his imperial majesty, I decided to send him. Verse 26. But I have nothing definite to write to our sovereign about him. Therefore, I have brought him before all of you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write, for it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner without indicating the charges against him. So he's in a quandary there. He's got a pickle there. So he's going to send him on to the emperor, but he doesn't know what to write in the letter because he's like, but I have no crime to write in the letter about why this person is even a prisoner in the first place. So in the next chapter, we see Paul addressing King Agrippa, and then we'll see if they come to a conclusion there. But right now at our cliffhanger, we see that they're like, what's he being charged with? What are we supposed to say in a message to the emperor about this? We don't know what to do. So that's a very interesting quandary that he is in. And that concludes today's study. Have a blessed day.